This is Stories of Impact, the art and science of human flourishing. In every episode, we travel the world to explore intersections of science and spirituality. I'm your host, writer Tavia Gilbert, and along with journalist Richard Sergey, every first and third Tuesday, we look through a new lens at old traditions, hear from new generations as they dream up innovative solutions, and learn new ways to make sense of modern life. Our intention on the Stories of Impact podcast, whether flora, fauna, homo sapiens, or otherwise, the variety of subjects we've featured across 120-plus episodes has underscored our commitment to people's progress and well-being. It's certainly enriched our well-being to tell each story. But is well-being the same as flourishing, or does one lead to the other? How do we know what flourishing is? What do people actually need to flourish? Times are tough. Is anyone actually flourishing? To answer those questions, we're turning today to two international researchers who are leading a groundbreaking study on human flourishing.
The hope for the study is that we would be able to understand the distribution and determinants of well-being across the globe. So we're looking at different aspects of well-being, at happiness, at health, at meaning, at character, at relationships and financial security, and also on the social and community and political and economic and religious and family drivers of these different aspects of well-being. So we hope to uncover through this study an understanding of well-being, how it's distributed across the globe and across different demographic groups, but also what pathways give rise to these different aspects of flourishing and what seems to be universal across cultures, across humanity, and what is more specific to particular cultures and contexts.
Our dedicated listeners will have heard that voice before. That was Dr. Tyler VanderWeele, the John L. Loeb and Francis Lehman Loeb Professor of Epidemiology at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. He's also the director of the Human Flourishing program at Harvard University. Later in the episode, we'll meet his research partner, Dr. Byron Johnson, the director of the Institute for Studies of Religion and a distinguished professor of the social sciences at Baylor University. Over the last 5 years, the two have collaborated on the first ever Global Human Flourishing Study, a research project with remarkable scale, surveying more than 200,000 people in 22 countries located on all 6 populated continents. Today, we'll hear what the researchers sought to learn about how humans the world over measure the domains that define human flourishing. But first, how do they define human flourishing?
Well-being might be viewed as all aspects of a person's life are good as they pertain to that individual, whereas flourishing is all aspects of a person's life are good, including the contexts and communities and environments in which that person lives. Working definition that we've been using for flourishing is the relative attainment of a state in which all aspects of a person's life are good, including the contexts and communities and environments in which that person lives. Flourishing includes all aspects. It's an expansive concept. It's multidimensional. We may be flourishing in some ways, but not others. We may be struggling with our health, but have good relationships, or have a strong sense of purpose, but that may make difficult demands on our life. So flourishing is multidimensional. It's also an ideal. It's not something we ever perfectly attain in this life. And then flourishing includes the context, communities, environments in which a person lives. The community's well-being is part of one's own flourishing, partially because the community contributes to one's well-being and shapes one's well-being, but also because of one's participation in the common good of the community.
The team set out to study global flourishing across 5 domains: happiness and life satisfaction, physical and mental health, meaning and purpose, character and virtue, and close social relationships. How did they identify or choose those areas to focus on? Dr. VanderWeele says,
each of those 5 domains satisfies the following 2 criteria. Each is nearly universally desired, and each is an end in and of itself. It's sought for its own sake. It's not merely a means to some other end. The argument was not that that was exhaustive of flourishing, but any reasonable conception of flourishing would include those 5 domains as well. We include numerous other questions as well, and had a group of about 150 scholars help us think through what questions to include. And so things like balance and peace and autonomy and gratitude, all sorts of other assessments are included in the study as well.
The Human Flourishing Study surveyed people from Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Egypt, Germany, Hong Kong, India, Indonesia, Israel, Japan, Kenya, Mexico, Nigeria, the Philippines, Poland, South Africa, Spain, Sweden, Tanzania, Turkey, the United Kingdom, and the United States, countries that are home to more than half the world's population. And Dr. VanderWeele and Dr. Johnson didn't just survey whomever was easiest to reach. They used nationally representative samples so that the people surveyed actually reflected the geographic, religious, and cultural diversity of the countries they lived in. So what have they learned in their 5 years of research? We'll start with the broadest reporting about gender. Dr. VanderWeele says,
men and women across these 22 countries are flourishing roughly similarly. But it's interesting, there is cross-cultural variation. In Japan, for example, women are doing considerably better than men, whereas in Brazil, it's the reverse. Men are doing considerably better than women.
So far, the results of the study reveal that overall,
men tend to report somewhat higher, for example, on financial security and on health, but women tend to report somewhat higher on relationships and on some of the character variables, for example. So there are differences across the flourishing domains, but if you average across those domains, in many countries, men and women are doing fairly similarly. Again, there are exceptions, but I'm not sure we've noticed any sort of universal patterns with geography. We've also found striking patterns with age. Somewhat strikingly, flourishing is increasing with age. And this is in contrast with some of the earlier research focused more on happiness and life satisfaction, which had suggested U-shaped curves where younger people and older people were doing better, and those in midlife, perhaps struggling with young children and aging parents and career challenges, reported lower. And what's happened in a number of countries across different flourishing domains is that left part of the U has been flattening. And so many countries in the United States, the UK, Argentina, Brazil, Australia, young people aren't doing as well. But that's not the case everywhere. In Egypt or India, one still finds more U-shaped patterns. And in Tanzania and Poland, flourishing is actually decreasing with age. So there are striking differences across different countries.
Dr. VanderWeele says they have discovered that there is one thing virtually every country has in common.
In addition to asking how people are doing in each of these countries, we've asked, how important are these domains of flourishing to you? How important is it to be happy, healthy, to have meaning, to be a good person, to have good relationships? And what we find is really across the 22 countries, almost everyone says all of these things are very important. While I do think there are differences in the nuances of understanding of happiness or flourishing across cultures and contexts, I think a lot of our core domains in the study, happiness, health, meaning, character, relationships, are universally valued. There's still questions of what might we be missing based on cross-cultural work. Things like peace, balance, harmony seem to be valued universally, but given more emphasis in Eastern cultures and have perhaps been neglected in Western research on well-being. So while there are differences and nuances, and those are important, I think especially when it comes to spiritual well-being, there's a lot that's held in common.
Each country may generally agree, in theory, about what matters, but particularly in the West, those values aren't widely reflected in day-to-day civic life. The U.S. is a good example. Dr. VanderWeele says that the reported rate of flourishing in the U.S. is about a 7. That's average.
One of the things that's perhaps striking in the United States is we don't do well in social relationships. I think that should give rise to reflection. Are we prioritizing the right things? One of the other striking patterns in the United States, which again holds in other countries as well, but is particularly pronounced in the United States, is that young people in the United States are not doing well. And I think this should really likewise lead to reflections on, are we sufficiently prioritizing the well-being of youth and the well-being of subsequent generations. Why is there so much difficulty there, and what can be done? I don't think it's any one thing. I think the lower well-being amongst youth is multifaceted. I think it's a whole set of changes that have altered well-being of young people today. And I think there are things we need to seriously wrestle with, work through, and try to improve.
One clue to the challenges young people face might be found in the relationship between each country's economy and its degree of flourishing.
Different countries are flourishing in different ways. Again, flourishing is multidimensional. And so we do find that countries with high levels of economic development, high levels of GDP per capita, tend to report relatively high on overall life evaluation and also on financial security. But interestingly, we find that middle income countries tend to report higher on other aspects of flourishing, higher on meaning, higher on relational satisfaction, higher on pro-social character. And it is quite striking. The relationship, for example, between GDP per capita and meaning in life is negative. The rich developed countries have lower levels of meaning in life than the middle income countries. And I think this leads to important questions with regard to how do we carry out economic development, which is unquestionably important, without compromising meaning and relationships and a pro-social orientation. To my mind, that's one of the biggest takeaways and the biggest questions that the global flourishing study raises.
How does Dr. VanderWeele make sense of a decline in meaning and purpose, along with rising GDP?
There are probably several phenomena taking place that give rise to what we've observed here. And this is now moving beyond the data. This is more speculative. This is not something we can definitively conclude. But I do think some of it is you get what you value. And so if you're pursuing economic development and increasing GDP as your primary goal, you're more likely to achieve that. But that could come at sacrifice to some of these other aspects of flourishing. So I do think that's part of it. I think some of it also is that as countries develop economically, we need each other less. And there can be a withdrawal from community life, which I think compromises relationships, compromises pro-social orientation, compromises meaning. So I think we need to find ways to build community. The third thing I might point to is religion. A lot of the countries that are reporting high across these different domains of flourishing have high levels of religious participation. And I do think the evidence here and in other studies indicates that participation in religious life, religious community, weekly service attendance contributes to happiness, to health, to meaning, to relationships. And many of the more economically developed countries have become less religious. And I think that's some of what's going on as well.
It's quite striking, Dr. VanderWeele says, which countries reported highest across the domains of flourishing.
The 5 countries that had a 7.5 or above were first Indonesia, then Israel, Philippines, Mexico, and Poland. That's averaging over scores on happiness, health, meaning, character, relationships, and financial security. Why those countries? It's not what we would have necessarily anticipated, and not what the numbers look like if you just ask about overall life evaluation. All of those countries do tend to report fairly high levels of religious participation. And I do think that's one thing that they hold in common. All are, especially the top 3 or 4, fairly strongly community-oriented, community-minded. And I do think that's an important part of this phenomena of flourishing as well. But I think it comes back to this point that flourishing is multidimensional. Different countries are flourishing in different ways. Sweden, which tends to be very high in life evaluation, is in the global flourishing study too. It's second on overall life evaluation. But if you look at meaning and purpose, it's 19th. There are these striking differences across countries and across domains of flourishing.
Dr. VanderWeele's partner in the research project, Dr. Byron Johnson, is struck by the fact that Indonesia is at the top of the list of flourishing countries.
The fact that a Muslim-majority country has come out on top is very interesting, and it doesn't appear that it was a one-off. The importance of religion, I think, to see that so consistent in the data has been one surprise. Religion's important across the world. This is one of those findings that's nearly universal. Even in highly secularized countries, we're finding these effects. So that, to me, was a bit of a surprise. I think that really does beg the question of what's going on here. And so studies that we will be able to do moving forward that will focus on Islam, for example. Most of the research done in the US comes from Christian samples. And so for us, we have a big enough in size that's going to allow us to do some pretty spectacular studies of all the great religious traditions. This, too, is a unique contribution that the Global Flourishing Study will be making. So that will be a game changer for us moving forward as we begin to look at some of these different world religions.
Were there any other surprises for Dr. Johnson? Results that might suggest a direction for one nation to borrow from another to increase their citizens' level of flourishing? He says the desire for such direction is there.
Well, I think one of the things that we're trying to say is that, like us as individuals, we're all on a flourishing journey. These countries are on a flourishing journey, and we can learn from all of them. So how can you do the right kind of analyses to allow us to learn what's happening in these middle-income countries that's important for us moving forward as we think about policy? One of the surprises was we were getting calls from policymakers wanting to know what recommendations we would make when we released Wave 1 studies. And our response was we were hoping to get these questions after Wave 3 or 4, not with Wave 1. It shows that there is a great deal of interest in the Global Flourishing Study, a much bigger appetite than we suspected was there. And so we are hoping that we can contribute to these policy discussions.
A global flourishing framework might offer direction and a path to positive impact for groups of all sizes, even for individuals.
When people hear it, they think this makes sense to me. I understand what you're saying. We've been having an ongoing dialogue with the San Antonio Spurs organization because they love the flourishing framework. They're one of these NBA teams. They're a small market. They work with their community and a lot of the people in the community that they want to help. So they want to recognize how they can help their players to flourish, but how can they help the community to flourish? So that one of the things they love so much about the flourishing framework is it's not so much about me, it's about how's my neighbor doing. It's a communal thing. And so when people hear about the flourishing framework, it immediately makes sense to them. It doesn't matter where they fit on a political spectrum. They like it. It resonates with them. It makes sense to them. And the first thing that they want to know is how can I make sure that I'm applying this in my own life and in the business that I run or in the community that I'm involved in. So this has been for me, one of the surprises is the openness to connect with the domains of human flourishing. We've had high schools and elementary schools also hear about the study and then reach out because their immediate thinking is, we would like for our schools, which tend to be struggling a bit, we would like to have a framework that we could get behind. But when politicians hear about it, or mayors, they think this is a good fit for their cities too, and businesses likewise. So it just seems to be something that sits well with people, it makes sense to people, and they want to be a part of it.
So where does the project go from here?
We are dreaming about what we have been calling internally Global Flourishing 2.0. What might that look like? Who might fund such an effort? Could we expand the number of countries? Could we bring a qualitative component to the Global Flourishing Study that doesn't exist at the moment? These are all things that we would love to be able to do in the future. It's already a path-breaking study, but what if we could bring a qualitative dimension to it?
At a recent data conference, says Dr. Johnson,
toward the end of one of the panels, a young person asked a question who was concerned about the finding with young people struggling, not just in the West, but this global struggling. And he said, we don't read papers in the nature journals. That's where you all are publishing, which we, of course, are so thrilled about. But it was, what are you doing about the 18 to 29-year-olds? And one of the things that we've been dabbling in is how can you translate the results in a way that will be meaningful for people that aren't familiar with academic journals?
The study is in its final official year, but the exploration of the data, that will continue on long into the future, says Dr. VanderWeele.
I do think that the global flourishing study will help contribute to our knowledge and understanding for many years to come. It is an extraordinary data set with 200,000 individuals, 22 countries, more than half the world's population, nationally representative sampling, multiple years of data. I think it's going to continue to give us insight into the distribution and determinants of flourishing. While we have a team of 40, 50 researchers working on the data, writing papers, there's so much more that can be done with it. And so I think the advance in knowledge over the years ahead, as we and other groups continue to make use of the data, is going to be incredible. So to my mind, the next several years really need to be spent mining the data, discerning what we can learn from it. And then after that, I think we're going to have a lot of synthesis to do. What are the big picture lessons? What do we extract from this? How should this be informing policy? What can we do differently as individuals and as societies to advance flourishing? And so while I'm excited about the next stretch of the global flourishing study, there's so much we can do with what we already have and what we will continue to collect. I think we'll be looking back 5-10 years from now in some amazement as to how much we've learned.
Come back in 2 weeks for another episode of Stories of Impact. In the meantime, please share the Stories of Impact podcast with someone you think would love it. And we'd love to hear from you. You can get in touch at storiesofimpact.org. This has been the Stories of Impact podcast with an interview by Richard Sergey. Written and produced by Tavia Gilbert for Talkbox Productions. Music by Alexander Filipiak. Mix and master by Kayla Elrod. Executive producer Michelle Cobb. The Stories of Impact podcast is generously supported by Templeton World Charity Foundation.